Genesis chapter 4, if you will, please. Last week we completed the third chapter, and we noticed that Moses recorded for us that Eve was deceived by the serpent and sinned. Adam willfully followed and sinned before God. We noticed also that God evicted both of them from the garden and prevented them from eating of the tree of life. This week, chapter 4, we will see the consequence of Adam's and Eve's sin in the lives of their two sons, Cain and Abel. Two sons. The tale of two sons. I see symbols here of two kinds of people in our world. Those who reject God's way and say, I'll do it my way, and those who accept it are both represented. Then we're going to meet at the end to introduce next week's message, Seth, the third son, and how that seems to change things. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. A cursory read of this chapter, we'll see that both men, Cain and Abel, brought an offering to the Lord. It was to respect God. However, Abel's was respected, accepted, acknowledged by God, and Cain's was not. Abel brought from his flock the firstborn. Cain brought fruit from the ground, grain perhaps. We're going to notice also that Cain rejected God's counsel and killed, murdered his brother. We're going to notice that prior to doing that, God went to Cain, knowing what he was contemplating, saw the physical change, and confronted Cain, and we're going to read exactly what God said to this young man. And then at the end, we're going to notice that God gives them a third son, Seth. Questions that we're going to raise today that we will look at for further study, and Pastor Paul and I are thinking that perhaps on the first Friday of March, since I've been suggesting questions for further study as we're going along, bring your research, your answers. And we'll gather together at 10 o'clock in the morning on Friday, and again at 7 and compare notes. So here are 6 more questions to add to your list. Why was Abel's offering acceptable to God and Cain's was not? Did Abel bring the right offering and Cain didn't? Is Lamech, however you want to pronounce it, the result of a father who really never repented of his sin? Why did Cain kill his brother? Where is the shadow of Jesus in chapter 4? And there are other questions you may want to look at. What we're going to notice as we go through here, 2 things. Third, if we add the one that we already know, is God is the judge of all things, everyone. We're not. He is. We're going to notice that both of these offerings, a lamb, or the first of his flock, and grain, are both codified in the law. We'll read in Leviticus, we've already done that many times, how both of these become acceptable offerings later on. So why is it, in your research, did God say to Cain, unacceptable? The other thing we're going to notice is sin has consequences. I'm looking around the room, and all the people my age, we know that. We've learned the hard way. So you young ones, listen and learn. Don't go through what we did. Now, let's look to the Bible and see what the scriptures actually say about these two people. Point 1, God confronts Cain, verses 1 through 7. chapter 4. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain and said, I've acquired a man from the Lord. Then she bore again, this time his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. Countenance fell. Assuming children took 9 months, as they do now, these two gentlemen were at least about a year apart, maybe older, maybe more time went by before Abel was born. The Bible doesn't say. What we do know is that Cain was the older of the two. We know that Eve gave God the credit, praise for both of these babies, showing us from the Bible that children are in fact a gift from God. Sometimes it doesn't seem like that, but every mom in this room knows in fact that they are. My daughter said one time, you know why children look like angels when they sleep? Have you heard this one? So we let them live through the night. There's many a time, Mom, when we laid them down, I know as a dad I felt this way, you have 3 seconds. I learned much later in life, even though I may not have said that out loud, they felt it. Children have this sense. You have a baby on your shoulder, it's going through whatever childhood thing they go through. It's 2 a.m, you've worked hard all day, you've got to get up at 6, get back to work, and your voice says, that's okay. Your pat says, you go ahead and cry. Your soul says, you have 3 seconds. They're listening to that. And you lay them down, and you do what your mother said, you count to 10. I learned that if I patted one on the back, she fell fast asleep. The boy was not so easy, but he was a sucker for rubbing the back of his little head. Just gently rubbed his little hair back there, and he was gone. Back to sleep, and Dad went back to bed. So God has given us these children to raise, to love, to cherish, to rear up. And they both brought an offering. In here it says, and in due time, doesn't it? And time came to pass. Let me go back and read it exactly. In the process of time, in verse 3, New King James. The New Living Translation says, when it was time for the harvest. That's how they interpreted that phrase. The English Standard Version says, in the course of time. The New English, at the designated time. I think these translators are trying to indicate to us that these two men knew the proper time to bring an offering to God. I suspect they were taught by their dad, who learned it from the Father God, that this was the proper thing to do. Clearly, they knew that they should bring something. Each man brought something from the work of his hands. Cain from his garden, Abel from his flock. We see in this account that one gift was acceptable, the other one was not. So in your research, see if you can find in the Bible why. And we'll come back and compare notes next month. We'll see in the next verses that God immediately comes to Cain and confronts him in his attempt to comfort him about what just took place, verses 6 and 7, chapter 4. So the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it." Now that is a very interesting statement. Thursday night, the men are studying Ezekiel, and we went through some of the chapters very quickly, and we wrote down on the whiteboard how many times God uses a visual aid to make his point. Here to Cain, one-on-one, Father God says to this young man, sin, he personifies it, lies at your door. Certain translation says crouched, as if ready to attack. Me being an old man with a youthful mind, I'm thinking coiled. Did we just read about a snake? Coiled, ready to strike, ready to bite. There's sin at your door, right by your door, right where he is, sin. And its desire is for you. And what's his desire? To rule over you. I think Father God is saying, don't allow that to happen. You rule over it. Did he succeed? Unfortunately, no. Because we know from the very next verse, verse 8. Now Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. Now the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" And he said, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Now every dad in the room would have thought, boy, if my boy had said that, good thing we're not God, huh? Because God is more patient than some of us dads. He lets him talk. But that tells me Cain was not repentant at all. Am I my brother's keeper? Did God know where Cain was? Did God know where Abel was? Absolutely. Verse 10, and God said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." I can only imagine what that sounded like in the ear of God. Verse 11, "So now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond you shall be on earth." Wow. That is a judgment. God does not strike him dead. He sends him further into the wilderness. And his curse is, when you till the ground, it will not yield harvest like it did before. It will be so different from the Garden of Eden. When you go to your dad Adam, he's going to go, "You should have known, son. It happened to Mom and I." And now when you till the ground, it's going to yield not its strength. He's really going to have to sweat to get enough to get by. And you won't have a permanent home. You'll be a vagabond and you'll be a fugitive. You'll be on the run. And Cain, verse 13, said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear." Now the Father in me says, well, you should have thought of that before. But God doesn't act like Nolan. He's very patient. Verse 14, surely you have driven me out this day from the face of the ground. I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on earth. And it will happen that anyone who finds me will kill me. I, me. What about his brother? What about, I'm sorry, Lord, forgive me? He's playing the victim here. Poor little me. And the Lord said, verse 15, therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark on Cain, lest anyone finding him should kill him. There's another question. How did God mark Cain? You'll have to come back on March 7th. Verse 16, then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, on the east of Eden. So he's further east. Nod is an interesting Hebrew word. It literally translates wandering. So in the land of wandering, he goes and wanders, but not for very long. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. So he found a place to settle down, and he built a town and named that town after his firstborn, Enoch. So there's another question. Where did Cain get his wife? March 7. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begot, I don't know how to pronounce these names. And then came Lamech, a really bad dude, verse 19. Then Lamech took for himself 2 wives, and the name of one was Adah, and the name of the second was Zillah. Another question. Where did he find 2 women to marry? And the ladies are going, what 2 women would marry 1 man? I agree. Yes. And these ladies bore sons. Footnote. Daughters are also born to mom and dad, but in the Bible, the sons are recorded. And there's cultural reasons for that the Bible hints at, but does not actually determine. So do not assume there were no daughters born to these people. And do not assume that God only counts boys as more worthwhile than girls. Do not assume that either. It's just that God requires of men a higher accountability. Remember, Adam willfully sinned. Eve was deceived. But back to the Bible. And Zillah, verse 22, bore Tubal-Cain, the instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. So now we know that men were not cave-like creatures. They are quickly learning how to turn ore into metals, bronze and iron specifically. Verse 23. Now we're going to see how bad this guy is. Then Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice. Wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. For I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 70-fold. Did God say that to him? It's not in here. So he is taking upon himself a 70 times more punishment than came upon his granddad. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth. For God has appointed another seed for me instead of Abel, whom Cain killed. And as for Seth, to him also a son was born, and he named him Enosh. And here's where we're going to pick up next week. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord. It's almost as if the firstborn, Cain, destroys the secondborn, Abel. A third son is given who has another son, and this group over here, Seth and Enosh, represent a crowd who are returning back to God, respecting the name of the Lord, calling upon his name, suggesting possibility regeneration. That God's plan is going to pick up when he regenerates mankind. When you're going through this on your own, I want you to pay attention to a couple of things. One, when God comes to Cain, he says, "Why are you angry? Why is your countenance fallen?" Literally, he is saying, "Why has your face dropped?" All of us in this room who are a certain age and older know when we see somebody, we know that person is angry. We can see it. They don't even have to speak. God knew Cain was upset, and he tried to stop him for letting anger take over and do something that he was going to regret, and that would be to kill his brother Abel. So he came to suggesting to me that God continually comes to people and talks to them. Those of us who have been walking with the Lord have heard that voice. We've heard him say to us, "Are you sure you want to do that?" Well, to me, he says, "Stop doing that." To you, he may be trying to slow you down, trying to remind you. He may be saying to you, sin is right there, crouched right next to you. And its desire is to rule over it. Don't let it. And as you go through it, you will see in Cain we have examples of what goes out there all the time. People playing the victim. They get arrested for doing something and they immediately say, "That's not my fault." They get called out on something, "It's not my fault." Every mom and dad in this room knows if you've raised a toddler and older, how did that lamp get broken? I don't know. I don't know did just about everything in the house, right? This is why parents of a single child, you don't know what being a parent is all about. You need at least 3. Yeah. 2, they can bicker back and forth. 3, there's always one who's going to tattle on the other 2. So if you are a single child, you need to read the Bible more earnestly than those of us who are 1 or 4 and 5. Being the firstborn is the toughest. How many firstborn in the room? Yeah. Tough, isn't it? Now, psychologists tell us it's the middle child that has the roughest. They don't know what they're talking about. They say that because they get caught in the dilemma of the firstborn being raised too severely and the third one getting away with everything. As a firstborn, enough of that. So what we've learned here this morning that I want you to walk out with is this single thing. Adam and Eve were given a third son among all the children. And through Seth, a generation was born that returned to call upon the name of the Lord. That's what I want you to concentrate on as we get ready for next week when we really get into what's going to take place in chapter 5. Secondly, I want you to remember that God is quick to restore. He came to Adam and Eve quickly, instantly. Before sundown, at least we know. He came to Cain before the murderous act. And he came to him again. Now, the Bible doesn't record what he does to Cain's children, but if God's true to his character, he came to them as well. Thirdly, God is in this room. Therefore, he is here speaking to you. Let me list through what he may be saying to one or two, maybe more of us. Don't be like Cain. If you're thinking about doing something, stop thinking about it. He's asking some of us, why are you angry? Why are you so upset? To some, hopefully only a few, why are you blaming him for what's going on? Do you think he is causing all of this in your life? And to some, he is saying, sin is at your door. To a few, he may be saying, before you get home this afternoon, behind the safety of your front door, sin will attack. The temptation to do something will be there. Or worse. And God is saying, rule over it. Lastly, and I'll close with this, is God hearing you say to him, help me, Lord?